everyone. And at the outset, I would like to thank the organizers, especially Dr. Rashmin, for giving me this opportunity to talk about OCT in neuro-ophthalmology. My talk comes with a disclaimer that it's going to be really dry with a lot of technical terms and a lot of technology in it, description of technology. But friends, if you're interested in knowing about OCT in neuro-ophthalmology, there's no second way of doing it. You have to go through this drill. And another thing that I want to say is that I invite all the hot seat participants to stop me anywhere in the talk. They can stop me if they haven't understood anything, because I understand the things can appear a little confusing. And if you think that I'm going a little too fast, you can stop me. You can just take it as if, we are having a one-to-one class. There are, I think, 4 or 5 of you here. So with that, I'll begin my talk on OCT neuro-ophthalmology. What is the advantage of this technology? It is a non-invasive, non-contact technology, which gives us the cross-sectional image of the either anterior or posterior segment of the eye. What we are concerned with here is the posterior segment cross-section. So it's almost like getting an optical biopsy. What we get in these images is the cross-sectional image of the retina. We can see all the layers of the retina by this technology. We get the thickness of different layers. And what we are interested in neuro-ophthalmology is the thickness of the retinal nerve fiber layer in the peripapillary area and the ganglion cell layer thickness along with the IPL, that is inner plexiform layer thickness. And we also can look at the optic nerve head morphology, and we can quantify the disc size and cup-disc ratio. A little bit about the history of this technology. It was developed by the MIT in United States in 1990, and but its clinical use became prevalent with the arrival of Stratus OCT, which was developed by Carl Zeiss in 2002. And this technology is time domain technology that is used in Stratus OCT. OCT is very similar to doing ultrasound B scan, where instead of the sound waves, light wave is used, and low coherence interferometry, typically employing near infrared light, is used to capture the images. In 2006, there was another development, spectral domain OCT, which is spectrometer-based technology and uses Fourier transformation to convert the obtained images, signals to images came. So now we'll look briefly into the history and evolution once more. Pay attention. Time domain OCT came in 2002. It is using a visible light with a wavelength of 810 nanometers. We are getting 400 A scans per second and achieving a resolution of 10 microns. And we are able to look till the retinal pigment epithelium. So the depth is still RPE. Then came spectral domain OCT in 2006. Again, a visible light source, 840 nanometer wavelength, but we are getting a much faster scan. We are getting around 1000 A scans in 0.04 seconds, and resolution has improved to 5 microns. And we are able to reach the choroid and sclera with the EDI mode of spectral domain OCT. Then in 2012, we got swept source OCT, where the light source is not visible to the eye. That is, the wavelength is 1050 nanometers. And look at the speed. We are getting 4 lakh A scans per second. Resolution is excellent, 5 microns. And again, we are able to reach the choroid, the depth of the choroid. So what's the advantage of this light source, which is not visible to eye, and getting the faster scans? We can avoid the motion artifacts. You can do it very fast. Now, in time domain OCT and spectral domain OCT, superluminescent diode laser is used as compared to the swept source OCT, where short cavity swept laser is used. In spectral domain OCT, the image is captured by spectrometer, and in swept source OCT, a semiconductor camera is used. Now let's look at the machines that we have. I'll be showing the machines that are present in SN. See, Cirrus HD OCT by Zeiss and Spectralis by Heidelberg. These two machines are the spectral domain OCT machines commonly used worldwide. And Atlantis is a swept source OCT machine. I've already told you the advantages of swept source. One more advantage is that it uses a wide field protocol. You can look at the posterior pole in one go. That is, you can look at the disc and macula in a single scan. Then in 2014, there was another edition, that is OCT angiography. So the machine's name is Zeiss Plex Elite. There are other machines as well, that is by Topcon and Artiview by Optiview. Now coming to our topic, that is OCT in neuro-ophthalmology. So OCT can image the tip of the afferent pathway, and we can capture reproducible and quantifiable measurements. You can really capture the information and keep it for your record for future reference. So we can look at the structure of the optic nerve head. We can look at the RNFL health. I said by doing, how do we look at the RNFL health? By doing the analysis of the peripapillary RNFL thickness analysis. This is the term which we need to remember. Then GCC health can be assessed by macular ganglion cell and inner plexiform layer thickness analysis. Now, this is the area which is imaged by the OCT. This is an EDI OCT image, and you can see it is reaching right from the RNFL. This is the RNFL, and this is the Bruch's membrane. This is the lamina cribrosa. So all the structures can be beautifully seen by the EDI technology of the OCT. Now here I'll also briefly tell you about the retinal layers. You can see the two dark layers here. This is the outer nuclear layer and this is the inner nuclear layer, these two dark layers, and this is the retinal nerve fiber layer. In between the dark layers are the plexiform layer, the inner and the outer. Now, what do we tell the optometrist or the technician doing the OCT when you want an OCT for a neuro-ophthalmological condition? I've already told you that we want the we want to look at the morphology by EDI scan. We want to look at the peripapillary retinal nerve fiber layer thickness analysis plus optic nerve parameters. And how do they analyze that? What do they feed in the machine? In Spectralis machine, they do RNFL protocol, which gives RNFL thickness along 3.45 millimeter circle scan. In a Cirrus machine, the RNFL thickness is generated by feeding in this program, that is Optic Disc Cube 200 into 200 scan. Again, in this scan itself, the RNFL thickness is assessed in a circle which is of 3.46 millimeter diameter. As I show you the images, you will be able to understand better. Now, the second thing I said we are concerned with is the macular ganglion cell inner plexiform layer thickness analysis. And the program that is used on Cirrus OCT is Macular Cube 512 into 128. For the optic nerve, we had done Optic Disc Cube 200 into 200. For the macula, we are doing Macular Cube 512 into 128. And what is the protocol that is to be used for this? That is called the Ganglion Cell Analysis or GCA protocol. It captures an ellipse centered around the fovea and has a radius of around 2.4 millimeter. In Cirrus, you get a combined measurement of the GCC and the IPL layer. In Spectralis the program's name is Posterior Pole Asymmetry Analysis. And here you can get separate thickness of ganglion cell layer and IPL layer. Here it's not an ellipse, it's a circle of around 3 millimeters diameter that is studied. Now let's look at the actual OCT. Now, before you touch the OCT image and use it for any analysis regarding any disease in neuro-ophthalmology, or for that matter, in any field, you should make sure that it's a well-focused, well-centered, high signal strength, at least more than 7 image without eye movement artifacts. The first thing that you get is the key parameters of optic nerve head, which are compared with the normative data. The other thing on the side is the RNFL thickness map. It is giving the topographical display of the RNFL thickness in the eye. The red and yellow that you're seeing in the dumbbell shape here, these areas are, it is seen in normal eyes. It is a representation of normal RNFL distribution. The next thing that we see is the RNFL deviation map, where the RNFL thickness is compared with the normative data. And here what you also see is a black outline of the optic disc and the optic disc cup. And this circle is the RNFL calculation circle, which we spoke about, 3.46 millimeter in diameter. This is an end-face image. Then we also get extracted horizontal and vertical tomograms from the cube that we have taken from the optic disc cube from through the center of the optic nerve head. The black line is the RPE and the edge of the optic disc, and the red line represents the ILM, and it also marks the cup. Next, we get the neuroretinal rim thickness, and here this is also compared with the normative data. And this circle, the thickness of the RNFL along this circle is displayed here as TSNIT, and it is compared with the normative data for both the eyes in the RNFL thickness map. We can also get the RNFL cloacas and quadrants, where the averages in these areas are compared with the normative data. So this was about the RNFL analysis. Now we come to the GCC analysis. Here the color-coded images of the MGC IPL layer thickness and the deviation map are given here. In this map here, there is a topographical display of the MGC IPL layer, and the warm colors like yellow and orange represent thick areas, and cool colors like blue represent thin areas. Now we are coming to the clinical entities, how we are going to use this information of RNFL thickness and MGC-IPL thickness or thinness in the clinical conditions. Now, firstly, we'll look at optic neuritis. In acute phase of multiple sclerosis optic neuritis, which may or may not be associated with papillitis, that is both in retrobulbar optic neuritis and papillitis, there is exoplasmic flow stasis, which leads to optic nerve head swelling, and it can be seen as thickness of the peripapillary retinal nerve fiber layer. So here we can see this is an acute case of optic neuritis. You can see temporal and nasal quadrants are showing thickness. And another thing is that in patients with multiple sclerosis, there is a preferential involvement of the temporal quadrant. Now, over a period of time, around 4 weeks, the retinal nerve fiber layer shows thinning. This is not from the same patient. This is another patient of optic neuritis, where after a month of optic neuritis, the patient has got severe thinning of the RNFL layer in the superior and inferior quadrant. So in NMO optic neuritis, there is a preferential involvement of the superior and inferior quadrant. So you can get subtle information, very fine points about which can point towards whether the optic neuritis is because of MS or because of NMO spectrum disorder. Very important thing here is your RNFL layer thickness does not tell you anything about the visual function. It doesn't tell much about the visual function of the eye. We'll see later in the one of the example cases. Now let's see about the macular GC IPL layer thickness analysis. What does it tell in optic neuritis? It correlates well with the visual function in terms of the visual acuity and fields. But it takes around 2 weeks to develop this thinness in this layer. That means if the patient has had an acute attack, RNFL thickness increases, but nothing happens in this layer. It takes 2 weeks for anything to happen in this layer. And severe thinning is seen in patients with optic neuritis associated with NMOSD, as seen in this case. Now, let's look at 2 different cases of optic neuritis, one because of MS and the other because of NMO. This patient has had an acute attack of optic neuritis in the right eye, and there is, you can see in the acute attack in 2 quadrants, increased thickness of the peripapillary retinal nerve fiber. But what we also notice is that the patient has presented with acute optic neuritis here and no complaints in the left eye, but there is a thinness noted in the left eye, which shows that somewhere in time the patient has had an attack in the past in the left eye. So OCT can detect subclinical disease activity and provide evidence of dissemination in time and or space, which is a criteria required for diagnosis of MS. So it becomes an important tool for the neurologist. Now, this is a patient of NMO SD, where the vision, we know it's a more severe form of optic neuritis. The vision was lost in the right eye and could not be done. The OCT could not be done. And in the other eye, where the vision loss is severe, we can see that the red areas signify severe loss of the peripapillary retinal nerve fiber layer in the superior and inferior quadrants, which we already have seen is indicative of NMO spectrum disorder. Now, if you have been monitoring the patient of optic neuritis with OCT and you find that the patient has stable RNFL thickness over a period of time, then it can be taken as an evidence of NIDA, that is, no evidence of disease activity. That is a criteria in MS patients. So these are the tools used. So these are the points which can be used by the neurologist to use OCT as a tool in the management of these patients. Now, the same patient of MS optic neuritis and NMOSD, we look at the macular GCIPL. Here we see, I said that in the acute phase, nothing happened. It takes 2 weeks for anything to happen in this area. So this thickness is absolutely normal. Whereas the other eye, which showed a subtle finding in the temporal quadrant of RNFL thinning, here you can see a significant loss in the GC-IPL analysis. Similarly, in NMO spectrum disorder, there is a complete thinning of the GCC, which is again characteristic of NMO disorder. There are another finding which can be seen at the macula in a case of optic neuritis has been picked up. And what is it that we can find in the retina at the macula? is these very tiny. I showed you two dark layers in the segmentation. The lower one was the outer nuclear and the upper one was the inner nuclear. So in the inner nuclear layer, if you see, these are dark spots here, and I've magnified it. These dark spots are hyporeflective spaces in the inner nuclear layer in the parafoveal region, and they are associated with disease activity in MS, and they are seen in around 20% of patients with NMO and 1 to 5% of patients with MS optic neuritis, and they represent retrograde axonal degeneration, and they implicate loss of retinal Muller cell function. So another finding in MS is that even if the patient has not had optic neuritis, they can have peripapillary retinal nerve fiber layer thickness. They can have thinning of this layer, and it is very similar to the thinning which is seen in other degenerative diseases like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease. And this thinning is progressive in multiple sclerosis, and we also get thinning in NMO spectrum disorder, but that is very much attack related. Now we'll move to the afferent pathway tumors. Can peripapillary retinal nerve fiber layer analysis be used to diagnose a tumor? Let's see. This is a patient who has normal optic disc, and we send him for OCT. OCT is normal in this eye, RNFL thickness. I'm talking about the peripapillary RNFL thickness, and has thinning in the temporal half of the RNFL in the in the left eye. Now, okay, can I diagnose? It's not actually pointing towards any particular diagnosis. Look at the visual fields; they give so much more information. So I'd rather rely on visual fields than PRNFL to diagnose my cases, to rule out afferent tumors. So this paper stated that this does not have much role in the diagnosis of pituitary adenomas. I'm talking about the RNFL thickness. I didn't say OCT. The RNFL, peripapillary retinal nerve fiber layer thickness analysis, does not pick it up. But let's see what we can glean from the MGCIP layer analysis. The same patient, when we do, here we can see in the thickness map, this yellow area, which indicates normal GCC health in this half, temporal half of the right eye, is seen as a good normal field in the nasal half of the right eye. And the deviation map shows us there is a GCC atrophy in the nasal half of the right eye. It is reflected as the opposite, that is temporal half as hemianopic. So what we can say is that a hemianopia on perimetry can present as hemimacular atrophy on MGC-IPL thickness map. If the patient, you cannot do visual fields, this can tell you something about the cellular masses. Another thing is that MGC-IPL thinning can occur earlier than PRNFL thinning, and even before the standard automated perimetry changes. So when we were talking about thickness, it takes time for this layer to thicken. It doesn't thicken, in fact, for it to give us some information. But as far as thinning is concerned, it occurs before the RNFL thinning takes place. This technology can also be used in monitoring and management decisions in optic pathway, in afferent pathway tumors. Now, for this patient, this is 2016 MGC-IPL analysis, and this is 2019. And we can see the values are very similar. So we know that this patient is not, the tumor is not progressing. It can also help in prediction of the visual outcomes. Patients with objective peripapillary retinal nerve fiber layer loss and MGC-IPL thinning at the time of surgery were less likely to have post-surgery recovery of visual acuity or visual field defects. Now coming to non-arthritic anterior ischemic optic neuropathy. We all know that NAION patients have smaller optic cups, and it can be clearly demonstrated quantitatively by OCT. Another thing OCT picked up is that subfoveal fluid that is present in the acute stage of NAION, and they have suggested that the resolution of this fluid leads to improvement in visual acuity. The thinning of the MGC-IPL layer occurs fastest after the ischemic insult to the optic nerve. It occurs almost 2 days after the onset of symptoms. So this is much faster than the 2 weeks that we noticed in inflammation, that is during optic neuritis. Now, if a patient has an acute attack of NAION, we can see the swelling, diagnose it, and quantify it in the PRNFL thickness measurements. And in older cases of NAION, that is after a few months, 2 months, 80% of patients show that it not only resolves, that thickness decreases, it becomes thin, and it keeps on progressively becoming thin till it establishes, the optic disc establishes itself into optic atrophy. Now coming to OCT in non-calcified drusen or peripapillary hyperreflective ovoid mask-like structures forms. Now in 2014, we published a paper in IJO which stated that we could differentiate between papilledema and pseudopapilledema with and without optic nerve head drusens using this technology. And we showed that buried optic nerve head drusen is seen as a round hyperreflective echo, this red arrow here above the RPE. So this is what we found in patients with pseudopapilledema. These are some more images from our paper. You can see these discrete hyperreflective echoes here above the RPE. And what we showed was that in a patient with true papilledema, if you do OCT, the triangular hyporeflective space is seen. And in case of pseudopapilledema, this triangular hyporeflective space is absent. Instead, there is a discrete hyperreflective echo, which we call a buried drusen. There were many other studies during that time describing optic nerve head drusen in terms of SDOCT, and there were different descriptions. So because of that, there was a optic disc drusen studies consortium formed, and it used an advanced technology of spectral domain OCT, that is EDI OCT, to study the drusens. They described, the consortium described the calcified drusen as a hyporeflective echo with these hyperreflective margins which are seen more clearly superiorly, and these are present above the level of the lamina cribrosa. This consortium gave a very elaborate OCT protocol for diagnosing these ODD. And what is important is that you require EDI mode of SDOCT, and they recommend scans with 97 sections. It's a time-consuming thing. And they also recommend using autofluorescence for diagnosing calcified optic nerve head drusens. So we use the same technology, and we could also see these hyporeflective echoes with hyperreflective margins. And what we previously called as buried drusen or the non-calcified drusen, the consortium has termed these as peripapillary hyperreflective ovoid mask-like structures or forms, and they say that these are markers of exoplasmic stasis on the optic nerve head. Shown histologically, it has proven that these are herniating optic nerve fibers. You can see them, that these are herniating optic nerve fibers. So the EDI mode of OCT is available on Spectralis and Cirrus, both the machines. And this is how the drusen appears on the EDI mode. Now, coming to the role of OCT in monitoring true papilledema in IIH patients, these are the RNFL thickness analysis pictures of the pre-treatment and post-treatment. You can see that the thickness decreases after the treatment, and that shows the success of the treatment. But there's a catch to it. If there is a reduction in the RNFL thickness because of the axonal loss, because of the disease progression, then it does not mean that the patient is this treatment is successful. So in these situations, the second tool of OCT, that is MGC-IPL, comes to use. If the MGC-IPL health is normal and the RNFL thickness is reducing, that means your treatment is successful. If the MGC-IPL is also becoming thin and the RNFL is also becoming thin, that means your treatment's not working and the patient is developing worsening of the IIH. Now, there are certain situations where you need to, where a neuro-ophthalmologist has to distinguish between the optic neuropathy and maculopathy, especially retrobulbar optic neuropathy, from a very subtle maculopathy like Azure or HCQ toxicity. These are diseases of the outer retina. So in Azure, what happens is that you do the retinal OCT and you can see this is the retinal ellipsoid layer, which becomes atrophic. This layer just above the RP, here it has become atrophic and it is sparing the fovea. At the fovea, it's normal. So this is typical of Azure. And in HCQ toxicity, you're seeing a foveal thinning and there is a loss of the photoreceptor and RP layer. So these can be picked up and you can distinguish between the RBN and these maculopathies. I have briefly mentioned about the SSOCT previously, and in neuro-ophthalmology, you can, just like EDI mode OCT, you can get a better evaluation of the ODD, and you can also look at the lamina cribrosa. And here, as I mentioned previously, that this technology has led to simultaneous imaging of the macula and the disc. So here what we are seeing is the optic disc pit with a disc pit maculopathy with a lot of skytic spaces. There's no SRF. Sometimes you get SRF that is continuous with the, you can see it in continuation with the disc pit. This is my last slide. OCT angiography has also been, the role of OCTA has been kind of tested in patients with neuro-ophthalmological conditions. And the layer which has come out, that is peripapillary radial capillary network. This layer, it is not visible on FFA, and this is something which the OCT-A can pick up. And it is present very superficially in RNFL, and the perfusion in this layer is reduced in various optic neuropathies like demyelinating optic neuritis, ischemic optic neuropathy, LHOA, and autosomal dominant optic atrophy. But one problem is there, that OCTA is not reliable in a swollen disc. And its use has been, a few studies have been there which have shown that the absent focal perfusion alongside superficial peripapillary capillary dilatation can pinpoint towards arthritic AION. So I suggest you can go through these very nice articles are there of OCT in neuro-ophthalmology, which can clarify your further